We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during these years. But the world is more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. So we're worried about Al-Qaeda. There are people in the First and Second World Wars who lost their lives in order to defend this country, which is the UK, and yet all that time, for most of my lifetime, and certainly the lifetime of most people listening to this, there has been a plan to destroy nation states and to establish a totalitarian world government. Because when David Rockefeller talks about national auto-determination, he is talking about democracy. So this is a plan to subvert democracy, and yet the hypocrisy of it is that our governments are moving into Libya, Syria, places like that, supposedly in order to help these countries to have democracy, which they pretend to believe in. And if anybody needs more evidence that David Rockefeller has conspired to set up a world government and destroy the United States, then all you need to do is look at page 405 of his autobiography. I will leave the quote underneath in the more section of this video. I'm not a lawyer, but I thought it would be interesting to look at the acts of treason in the UK and the US. I'm going to start with the UK. The Treason Act 1351 apparently was last used to prosecute William Joyce in 1945 for collaborating with Germany in World War II. William Joyce, of course, was Lord Haw-Haw. Now we get to the nitty-gritty. I think in the UK it's high treason that is the relevant bit. A person was guilty of high treason under the Act if they compassed or imagined, in other words, planned the death of the king, his wife or his eldest son and heir, violated the king's companion, etc. The really important bit, I think, is this one: adhered to the king's enemies in his realm, giving them aid and comfort in his realm or elsewhere. Now, there could have been a problem with this because it says adhered to the king's enemies in his realm. In other words, conspired with the king's enemies in his realm. That would have to be in the UK. And then it goes on to say giving them aid and comfort in his realm or elsewhere. So the elsewhere is giving them aid and comfort. But English law is based on precedent, and this anomaly was apparently dealt with in the case of Roger Casement, who in 1916 was accused of collaborating with Germany during World War I. The defence argued that the Act applied only to activities carried out on British soil, while Casement committed the acts of collaboration outside Britain. However, closer reading of the medieval document allowed for a broader interpretation, leading to the accusation that Casement was hanged by a comma. The court decided that a comma should be read in the text, crucially widening the sense, so that in the realm or elsewhere meant where acts were done and not just where the king's enemies may be. So in other words, you can say that a person can be considered to be guilty of treason if they have adhered to the king's enemies in his realm, in other words in the UK or elsewhere. Now, how would this apply to people who go to Bilderberg, where there's a clear plot against the UK? Well, certainly they adhere to the Queen's enemies elsewhere, because the Bilderberg meetings are not held in the UK. But I think the problem that we would have with the act of treason is that it refers to the king, in this case the Queen's enemies. And we can't say that these are the Queen's enemies. The Queen might approve of world government. And in fact, I think there's quite a lot of evidence that she would do, because Prince Philip is president of the World Wildlife Fund, and he believes in the importance of nature, which takes precedence over human beings, which is exactly the same theme as this world government is likely to take up. So I'm not sure that treason protects us at all, because it only protects the Queen, it doesn't protect us. Looking at the American law of treason is really quite interesting, because it's quite obvious that it's been taken directly from the UK law, but because they don't have a monarch, they are actually very much better protected. Treason against the United States, it says, shall consist only in levying war against them, or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. The exact words that are in the British Treason Act are here in the American Treason Act, but instead of protecting the king or queen, this time it's adhering to their enemies refers to the United States, which is the people. The Supreme Court ruled that there must be an actual assembling of men. Well, there clearly is that with Bilderberg, for the treasonable purpose to constitute a levying of war. So in other words, I think the act of treason, the treason law for the United States, actually does protect United States citizens against the actions of these people in Bilderberg. But I know that Alex Jones has cited the Logan Act, so I looked up the Logan Act, and the Logan Act is a United States federal law that forbids unauthorized citizens from negotiating with foreign governments. It was passed in 1799 and last amended in 1994. Violation of the Logan Act is a felony, punishable under federal law with imprisonment of up to 3 years. So the problem I see with the Logan Act is illustrated by this case, which is mentioned in Wikipedia. It says, in the case of Senators McGovern and Sparkman, the executive branch, although it did not in any way encourage the senators to go to Cuba, was fully informed of the nature and purpose of their visit, and had validated their passports for travel to that country. So I suppose the executive branch, which is the US government, could say that they were fully informed of the nature and purpose of the visit of any Bilderberg attendees, and that they had validated that visit and agreed with it. So it's difficult to know whether the Logan Act actually could apply in reality. But certainly the act of treason does apply, it seems to me. If it is correct that the main sponsor of the Bilderberg meetings over the past 40 years has been David Rockefeller, and if it is correct that David Rockefeller's purpose in having these annual meetings for the past 40 years has been to implement the replacement of Western democracy, and in particular US democracy, with an elitist dictatorship, and if it can be established that the participants over the past 40 years have adhered to David Rockefeller's purported intent to establish a dictatorship of the elite, then it must be right that the various Bilderberg meetings are prima facie evidence of treason by all of their participants. And surely any person attending on 2 occasions must be fully in support of the intentions of David Rockefeller. In respect of the UK, the position is the same, except to the extent that the monarchy/establishment would be unwilling to accept that David Rockefeller is an enemy by virtue of his intention to replace democracy with an elitist dictatorship. I believe that a prosecution for treason by both the US and the UK is the right thing to do, and I would like to see the following prosecuted in the UK. Intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. So we're worried about Al-Qaeda. There are people in the First and Second World Wars who lost their lives in order to defend this country, which is the UK, and yet all that time, for most of my lifetime, and certainly the lifetime of most people listening to this, there has been a plan to destroy nation states and to establish a totalitarian world government. Because when David Rockefeller talks about national autodetermination, he is talking about democracy. We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during these years. But the world is more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an